Life is full of suffering, and so its chief purpose is a pleasure. There is no God and no afterlife. Men are the helpless puppets of the blind natural forces that made them, and that gave them their unchosen ancestry and their inalienable character. The wise man will accept this fate without complaint, but will not be fooled by all the nonsense of Confucius and Mozi about inherent virtue, universal love, and a good name. Morality is a deception practiced upon the simple by the clever. Universal love is the delusion of children who do not know the universal amity that forms the law of life. And the good name is a posthumous bubble, which the fools who paid so dearly for it cannot enjoy. We have reached the final lecture in our exploration through the ideas of the earliest known philosophers of Chinese civilization, the Classical Chinese Philosophers. Yangzhu, also known as Yangzi, from 440 BCE to 360 BCE, was one of the prominent philosophers of the 100 schools of thought. Like other schools of philosophy that flourished from the 6th century to 221 BCE, during the spring and autumn period and the warring states period of ancient China, he was interested in alleviating the suffering and ending the endless conflict. Though when the first emperor of the Qin dynasty united China, he burned any books which did not fit his legalist agenda. Since Yangzi's philosophy, which advocated for the self-preservation and looking out for the best interests of oneself, did not align with the state agenda, his works were also destroyed. Because there are no surviving writings by Yangzi, like the agriculturalist, little is known of his life. However, he seemed to be very influential back in his day that whatever is known about his philosophy was preserved through the works of others in fragments and in conversations, even though they were the people who were critical of his message and aimed to refuse and discredit his teachings. As a result, it is hard to understand him conceptually and textually, and so, in this lecture, before we analyze his positions deeper, we will first need to understand the distinction between psychological egoism and ethical egoism. Later, we will investigate his positions by reading the fragments that were left behind. Although psychological egoism and ethical egoism are confused with one another, they are actually quite different doctrines. Psychological egoism asserts that everyone only cares about him or herself, while ethical egoism advocates that everyone ought to only care about him or herself. While psychological egoism claims that people carry out their actions because of self-interest, ethical egoism claims that the only good reason that anyone has for doing something is self-interest. Thus, while the former is a descriptive claim, the latter is a prescriptive claim. Because some people are confused with an is and ought, they often misinterpret ethical egoism as support for psychological egoism. Almost all serious philosophers regard psychological egoism as obviously and demonstrably false. However, this video's focus is not on refuting psychological egoism, but will instead elaborate more on Yangzi's, who has been described as an ethical egoist or hedonist by his philosophical rival due to his position on human nature. Different philosophers emphasize one connotation or the other on the nature of humans. Some refer to nature as the innate characteristics of a thing, while some refer to nature as the characteristics of a thing that has the potential to develop into something for its life in an ideal environment. For example, if we think about how many fingers do humans have, we will say 5, but some humans may have fewer than 5 fingers because of injury, while 1 in a 10,000 population may have more because their genes for fingers are dominant, while the rest have recessive genes. Yet, we say that humans have 5 fingers because we have a natural conception of what is natural for humans in a normal and healthy course of development. For Yangzi, his conception of human nature is something that is not an innate characteristic of a thing, but rather as something that can develop in a best possible environment. Thus, he believes that not all humans are purely self-interested, just like how not all humans have 6 fingers. Rather, our motivations other than self-interest are the result of an artificial warping of human nature. So, his prescription for life is something that is aimed at the majority of the population, who are less inclined to be self-interested than a few, which is why Yangzi is an ethical egoist. During the Warring States period in which he lived, none of the states had the advantage over the others, so the bodies started piling up without foreseeable peace in the near future. The lives of those who fought for their kingdoms were regarded as expendable, and lives that are already short could be cut even shorter at any time and for any reason through famine, warfare, or by the whims of tyrannical kings. Consequently, he developed his philosophy from the 4 principles which he believed were self-evident. Life is suffering for which there is no remedy. There is no God, no afterlife, and nothing other than the physical world that we live in. Both evil and righteous people can die equally, without punishment or reward, and accordingly may get away with their actions. Thus, to escape this life where someone may not receive what they deserve, we should follow the way of nature and do what benefits ourselves, and that is the only appropriate response to life and its highest goal. Besides, it is not something that we should avoid, because it is natural, since there is nothing more natural than the human nature that has been gifted by nature, or in Chinese, Tian. Because he advocated for us to live for ourselves, the path that other schools of philosophy advocated, such as the Mohists and the Confucians, is contrary to human nature, because both of them ask that we should sacrifice ourselves for the well-being of others. One fragment that may reflect Yangzi's opposition to other schools is the story of Robert Shir, a brief imaginary dialogue between the character and Confucius. When Confucius reprimanded the robber for stealing as crazy, fraudulent, and vain activity that cannot fulfill himself, he replies to his criticism as, "The eyes want to see colors, the ears want to hear sounds, the mouth wants to taste flavors, and the emotions want fulfillment. If you're not gratifying your wishes and cherishing your days, then you do not understand the way." For Yangzi, the pre-civilized state of nature is a utopia in which humans easily satisfy their basic desires for things like food and sex without the need for violence, competition, or pointless greed. Far from being our salvation, the development of government institutions ruins this Edenic state. This anarchical state of nature argument contrasts that of the Mohist, who claim that the purpose of the governments is to rescue humans from a world of endless conflict and suffering. He further contends that people like Confucius all forcefully went against their essence in nature because profit confused them about their true self. In other words, people fight to gain political power, to achieve a reputation, and to amass more wealth than they can spend, while they are suffering in their personal lives and causing others to suffer. Some even die as a result of this pursuit for things that are ultimately in vain. Fragment from a dialogue between a follower of Yangzi and Mozi further illustrates this point. The conversation goes as follows. "When I'm beaten, I feel pain. When others are beaten, the pain does not extend to me. Why should I resist what does not give me pain, and not resist what gives me pain? Therefore, I would rather have them killed to benefit me than have me killed to benefit them." Mozi replied, "Is this view of yours to be kept secret, or to be told to others?" Wumazi replied, "Why should I keep my opinion to myself? Of course I shall tell it to others." Mozi said, "Then, if one person is pleased with your doctrine, there will be one person who will desire to kill you in order to benefit himself. If 10 persons are pleased with your doctrine, there will be 10 persons who will desire to kill you to benefit themselves. On the other hand, if one person is not pleased with your doctrine, there will be one person who will desire to kill you as the propagator of an evil doctrine. If 10 persons are not pleased with you, there will be 10 persons who will desire to kill you as the propagator of an evil doctrine. So where, after all, does the benefit of your doctrine lie?" Here, Mozi provides one of the classic arguments against ethical egoism. It seems like it may not be in the self-interest of the ethical egoist for other people to adopt his position. Because for an egoist, the best case scenario would be to live in a society of altruistic people, while she is the only ethical egoist, so that she can take advantage of their altruism and the benefits they provide her. However, this can only happen if and only if the altruists do not know that the ethical egoist is not among one of them. Therefore, some philosophers see this as a refutation of ethical egoism, because they believe that altruistic people will no longer accept the egoists once they find out how they have been taken advantage of. However, ethical egoists have responded that there is nothing logically or practically inconsistent with them wanting other people to not believe the truth. Yangzi went so far as to claim that people should not give up a strand of their hairs, even if doing so will save the world. A third fragment consisting of a dialogue between Yangzi, Meng Suiyang, who is a Yangzi's follower, and Qian Guli, who is a Mohist, provides us further information to illustrate this point. Qian Guli asked Yangzhu, "If you could help the whole world by the loss of a hair of your body, would you do it?" Yangzi replied, "The world would surely not be helped by a single hair." Supposing it did help, would you not do it? Yangzhu did not answer him. Yang said, "You have not fathomed what is in my master's heart. Let me say it. Suppose for a bit of your skin you could get 1,000 in gold. Would you give it?" "I would," said Guli. "Suppose that by cutting off a limb at the joint you could win a state. Would you do it?" Guli was silent for a while. Yang continued, "That one hair matters less than skin, and skin less than a limb is plain enough. However, go on adding to the one hair and it amounts to as much as skin. Go on adding more skin and it amounts to as much as one limb. A single hair is certainly one thing. Among the myriad parts of the body, how can one treat it lightly?" Guli challenges Yangzi that it is absurd to not sacrifice something as worthless as a single strand of hair just to benefit the whole world. In response, Yang gets Guli to admit that even though he would give up a bit of skin for 1,000 pieces of gold, but would not give up an entire limb, even to control an entire state. He illustrated that if any part of the body, no matter how small, are worthless, then larger parts of the body composed of those parts would also be worthless. But larger parts of one's body, like limbs, certainly are not worthless. Therefore, individual hair isn't worthless and has some value, even if it is ridiculously small. Because the hair has some value, it is not absurd to be willing to sacrifice it for the benefit of others. Since humans are animals, and animals act out of self-interest, he argued that humans should also do the same in life. One may mistake Yangzi as touting selfishness as the supreme virtue that one should hold dear in one's life, and would justify tyranny as an acceptable form of government, while a despot as an ideal ruler. However, Yangzi claimed that one should be judicious when one has authority over others and condemn those in power who use their positions to benefit themselves and held tyrants as despicable humans. This position may seem contradictory, but it is hardly so for Yangzi. He argues that by accepting a position of power, one had already pursued one's pleasure and now had to pay for it. By exercising that power responsibly, in fact, he endorsed overthrowing the government if it means that the state intervention, which is essentially morally flawed, is impeding an individual's quest for fulfilling one's pleasure and desire. Individual pleasure is indeed desirable, a view that all the hedonic philosophers like Epicurus share, but not at the expense of the health of individuals. Yangzi and those in the school of Yangzi saw individual well-being as the main purpose of life and considered anything that may harm or impede one's well-being as immoral and unnecessary. Like Epicurus, the ancient Greek philosopher, Yangzi would argue that reading a book or taking a walk in the woods is as pleasurable as drinking too much wine, and all forms of enjoyment are worthy of pursuit. We will analyze further on his existential philosophy and philosophy of death in later episodes. However, we will end today's video and conclude this introductory series on classical Chinese philosophy with the following grim reminder from Yangzi on the shortness of life. 100 years is the limit of a long life. Not 1 in 1,000 ever attains it. Suppose there is one such person. Infancy and feeble old age take almost half of his life. Rest during sleep at night. And what has wasted during the waking hours in the daytime takes almost half of that. Pain and sickness, sorrow and suffering, death of relatives, and worry and fear take almost half of the rest. In the 10 and some years that are left, I reckon there is not one moment in which we can be happy, at ease without worry. This being the case, what is life for?